After spending about 10 months living on cruise ships as a passenger, I'm home, and now I get to share it all with you. I made the decision to pack up my life here in the UK, jump on a plane, and cruise to as many parts of the world as I could, using as many cruise ships as I could. And I can't really believe that we're out the other side of it. In this video, I'm kicking off episode 1 of my 7-part YouTube video series, during which I'll be sharing everything with you from what has been one of the most amazing experiences of my life. Today in episode 1, I'll be telling you about the route that I took for my cruise adventure, and also I'll share with you which ships I travelled on. Episode 2 is when we'll dive into the ships in a little bit more detail. I'll share with you which ships I particularly enjoyed cruising on, which I didn't really enjoy cruising on as much, and also some of the things that I've learned about the industry as a whole throughout this whole time at sea. Episode 3 is when we'll go into accommodation in detail, or cruise ship cabins. Whether you are looking to book a cruise ship cabin, or whether you'd just like to see the ones that I travelled in, hopefully you'll find something in that episode that will whet your appetite. I'm going to share with you the best cabin I had over that window. I'm going to share with you the worst cabin I had. And I'm also going to share with you the most unique cabin that I saw while at sea. In that video, I'll also cover some of the things that I do every single time I enter a cabin to enjoy the experience to the full. After accommodation, we'll move on to look at a topic that I didn't realise I would encounter as much as I did, and that is homesickness. Whether you're travelling for 1 or 2 nights, 1 or 2 months, or 1 or 2 years, you might find at some point you would just love nothing more than to be at home on the sofa in your pyjamas. And that's okay, because there's a whole host of things that you can do to improve the situation if you do find yourself feeling homesick, and that's what we'll cover in that episode. Moving into episode 5, I'll be mapping out for you specifically how I organised my year and how I planned for it ahead of time. I'll also share with you some of the things that I did to my land life to make it as easy as possible to make the transition to ship life. So stay tuned and we'll cover that in episode 5. Before moving on to episode 6, which is where I will share with you my favourite ports. It's all very well for me to show you the ships and to show you the cabins, but at the end of the day, most people take a cruise to see the world, which is what I wanted to do. So it would be foolish of me to wrap up on this whole experience without telling you about the ports that I went to, which were my favourite ports, which were my least favourite ports, and which ports do I think you need to add to your bucket list. Well, stay tuned, because we'll cover them all in episode number 6. Episode number 7 is then our final episode, and that's where I'll cover frequently asked questions. Throughout my time at sea, I have been asked the same questions over and over again. I want to cover them in that episode to hopefully put to bed some of the biggest queries that might be in your mind when you think about spending 10 months living on cruise ships. Anyway, the final thing I would like to say before jumping into episode 1 is that if you enjoy this video, it would be amazing if you would support my channel by clicking the thumbs up button. It would also be great if you'd come with me for the rest of this series and so many other videos. All you have to do is click the subscribe button. Now let's get started. All of the ships that I'm going to walk you through shortly feature on my YouTube channel already. At the point of recording this video, my channel is organised largely by cruise lines, so it should be fairly simple for you to find the content that you're looking for. If, however, I mention a specific ship or a specific place and you can't find that anywhere on my channel, just leave a comment down below and I will gladly send you the link to check that out. So anyway, where did our story begin? Well, we start all the way over in Dubai in the UAE, which is where I boarded MSC World Europa. At the point of my cruise, she was one of the largest cruise ships in the world, and she was the newest ship in the MSC Cruises fleet. I spent a number of weeks on board bringing that ship home to Europe for the first time. She was launched as a floating hotel in the Emirates for the World Cup, and after that, the cruise that I took then came through the Suez Canal and back into Europe. I was on that ship for a total of 21 nights, which was an amazing amount of time to experience a ship like that. After leaving MSC World Europa, I had 4 nights in the French port city of Marseille before making my way to Barcelona to board my next ship. Now, it was time for me to try a brand new cruise line for the first time, and that was Costa Cruises. I spent a few weeks on one of their older ships, Costa Diadema, and I was really surprised at what I found on board. To find out more, as I mentioned earlier, head to the Costa playlist on my channel. I've got a lot to tell you about from that cruise. The first week on board was spent going around Europe, and the second week was spent heading out to the Canaries and ticking off some ports that I've never been to before. After leaving that ship, I had 1 night in Barcelona before heading back to the port to get on Symphony of the Seas, which is a cruise ship I have wanted to cruise on for years. She's a huge Oasis-class ship from Royal Caribbean, and I spent 7 nights on board, completing what I would term as a crowd pleaser of a Mediterranean route. What I mean by that is a 7-night rotational route out of Barcelona, where you cover Barcelona, Marseille, Rome, all the ports that feature on the really, really popular Mediterranean itineraries. But for me, it was okay that I'd been to a lot of those ports before, because this week was all about the ship. After leaving Royal Caribbean's Symphony of the Seas, it was then time for me to do some ship hopping across 2 Costa Cruises ships. They were Costa Toscana and Costa Smeralda. The day I left Symphony, I boarded Toscana. I then spent a week on board before switching to spend a period of time on board Costa Smeralda, which is a sister ship from that cruise line. After that, I then rejoined Costa Toscana for a cruise with one of my best friends who had flown over from the UK, and that was so fun. After doing so many solo cruises and spending so many nights on my own on ships, it was brilliant to have her with me, and we had such a good time. After leaving Costa Toscana for the second time, I then took a flight to Israel for a cruise that, at the point of recording this video, simply wouldn't be possible with everything going on now in that part of the world. I flew to Tel Aviv, I then took a train to Haifa, and I then boarded Rhapsody of the Seas, which is one of the oldest cruise ships in the Royal Caribbean fleet. The itinerary that I enjoyed that week was the Greek islands, so we covered Cyprus on our way. We then ticked off Mykonos, Santorini, Rhodes, and Athens before heading back to Israel. That then covers part 1 of my trip, and at the end of this, I then flew back to the UK for a few weeks because that coincided with some family commitments that I had here over summer. After summer, I then jumped on what was my first proper long-haul flight of my adventure, which took me from the UK all the way across to the other side of the US to Los Angeles in California. The first ship that I boarded over there was Navigator of the Seas from Royal Caribbean, before then heading back to Long Beach to board my first ever Carnival cruise. It was time for me to board Carnival Panorama for what would be a 7-night itinerary that would take me down to multiple new ports in Mexico that I'd never seen before. They were Puerto Vallarta, Mazatlan, and Cabo San Lucas. After that, I headed back up to Long Beach, California, just as one major storm was getting ready to sweep onto the mainland. And after spending 2 nights in LA, or Long Beach to be exact, I then went back to the port to board my first ever Cunard cruise. You're getting the picture. This whole experience was full of first experiences with first cruise lines for me and brand new ships for me, which was amazing. The Cunard ship I chose to cruise on was Queen Elizabeth. Now, I was on there for a couple of weeks, cruising from one side of the US through the Panama Canal and into the other. It was amazing for me to go from California to Florida, and it was an experience that I will never forget. Now, as much as the whole experience was about trying new things that I've never done before, I also wanted to try very different things. So when I left Cunard's Queen Elizabeth, I then went straight to Miami Cruise Port to board a very different cruise line, and that's when I experienced my first ever Florida departure on a Virgin Voyages cruise ship. Yes, that's right, I left Cunard to join Virgin. I spent 4 nights on board Scarlet Lady for a cruise that would take me to Key West, Bimini, and then back up to Florida. It was so fun and so different to Cunard. The day I left Virgin, I then headed across to spend some time on another Carnival ship. So that was then time to join Carnival Horizon at Miami Cruise Port on exactly the same day as I left Virgin. That cruise was to parts of the Caribbean that I have been to before years ago, before I started a YouTube channel, so it was great to go back there with a slightly different perspective. The ports on that itinerary were Ocho Rios, Jamaica, Grand Cayman in the Cayman Islands, and Cozumel in Mexico, before I then came back up to Florida. After that, I flew to New York to spend a week with some friends that I met on a cruise years ago who live in Connecticut. After Connecticut, it was time to make the very quick train journey back to New York City, which is where I would then board my final 2 ships of this part of my trip. First, MSC Meraviglia took me from Brooklyn Cruise Terminal to Canada and New England, which is something I've wanted to do for ages. I've wanted to try and see the fall colours in Canada and New England on a cruise for ages, and I was delighted to be able to do that before coming back to head over to Manhattan Cruise Terminal to board Norwegian Escape. Now, Norwegian Escape was the first ever cruise ship that I sailed on, and I was so delighted to be able to squeeze in a week on board that ship as part of this amazing adventure at sea. After that, I then flew back to the UK. It was actually my dad's birthday, so I flew from New York back to the UK to celebrate his birthday before heading out to Barcelona to begin the 3rd and final leg of my time at sea. That meant it was time to join Valiant Lady, another cruise ship from Virgin, for a much longer cruise this time. I boarded in Barcelona and was on board for a number of weeks, travelling first of all around a few ports in the Med, before then beginning the crossing of the Atlantic. I was on board for a total of 2 weeks, and we spent 9 nights at sea without reaching land at any point. And to be honest, I thought I would get a little bit cabin fevery being at sea on a Virgin ship for that length of time, but I really didn't. The experience was amazing. After that, I spent a number of weeks on board my first ever Holland America ship, which was Rotterdam, which at the point of recording this video was the newest ship in the fleet, before then leaving that ship and joining a very different ship. I spent 2 nights on board Paradise, which is the first cruise ship in the Margaritaville at Sea fleet, for a cruise that would just take me across the water from Miami to the Bahamas and back again. But that was very interesting to discover that cruise line. And after that, I then flew to New York to spend a few nights there before Christmas, to then board my final ship of my sabbatical year, which was the Queen Mary 2. That ship then took me from New York City back to Southampton in England, where I then left the ship to celebrate a family Christmas and to also celebrate completing what has been an absolute remarkable year. I, looking back, still can't really believe that I've done it, and I can't really believe a lot of the places that I've experienced. As I mentioned earlier, if you'd like to see more from any of the ships that I've just mentioned, then please do head over to my YouTube channel and search by Cruise Line. If you can't find the video you're looking for, let me know in the comments what you're trying to find, and I'll try and send you the link. Now let's move on to look at the financial side of things. In other words, the money. I have been asked the question from so many people and so many different directions, how on earth have you funded a trip like this? And how could I maybe look at travelling long term myself? Now, the reality is I do not have a massive secret that I'm about to let out the bag, which will allow you to travel for a massively discounted price. I'm not going to let that secret out the bag because I don't have one. It's as simple as that. The reality is that I saved up incredibly hard in order to do a trip like this, and I made, at times, pretty significant sacrifices in my personal life in order to then make this trip a reality. Across the year, I did attract a lot of maybe quite negative attention on social media from people who didn't understand the full picture, and to be honest, it was pretty difficult to read some of those comments, considering the sacrifices that I had made personally to get to the point of being able to execute what was an absolute adventure in my mind. Now, you can do some things to help from a budgeting point of view, and I'm going to cover them when we get to episode 5, which is where I'm going to show you exactly how I mapped out my year. One thing that I will say for now as an example is that you'll notice from my run through of which ships I travelled on, I travelled with a massive range of cruise lines. The reason for that is that if I were to cruise with Cunard or Holland America at the more premium end of the market, I wouldn't have been able to afford to cruise for such a long time. However, that's where I found cruise lines like Carnival, as an example, or Costa in Europe to come in really, really useful, because in some examples, I could get 3 weeks on board a Costa cruise ship for the price of 1 week on a Holland America ship. And when you're looking for cruises that will fill gaps, you can absolutely look at some more budget-friendly carriers to fill that space. So there's a whole range of clever things you can do, but I'm not going to be able to share with you some amazing secret that will allow you to travel for no money at all. The reality is I had to save really, really hard. Now, as I say, this is episode 1 of a 7-part series. In the next video, I am going to be diving into the ships that I travelled on in more detail, and I really hope you'll come with me because I have got so much that I want to tell you about. If you've enjoyed this video today, then please do support my channel by clicking the thumbs up button, and also click subscribe because that is the easiest way to be notified of when my future videos become available. But for now, from the middle of England in the UK, I have to say a massive thank you to you for watching. If you enjoyed this video today, come and join me in episode 2, which is where we're looking at the ships in way more detail. Which ships did I love? Which did I not love? And which do I think you should maybe look at adding to your list in the future? Come and join me over here and I'll share everything.